A person born blind dies on the operating table. Then he returns and describes, in detail, the color of his surgeon's tie. This isn't a metaphor, it's a documented fact. One of them, Vicky Umapeg, blind from birth, was able to describe not only her doctor's appearance after her experience, but also the silver pen in his breast pocket, which he had brought for the first time that day. Hallucinations are based on past experience, but these individuals have no visual experience. For them, sight is an unimaginable process. It's like someone born deaf suddenly hearing a symphony. If this information isn't coming from the brain, then what is? This is just the first crack in the wall of our conventional reality. Next, we will present two more mysteries that science cannot explain. How does a 2-year-old boy from Louisiana, who can't even point to his own state on a map, describe in detail the mechanics of a Japanese fighter plane from World War II, name his fellow servicemen, and pinpoint the exact location of his death? Where does this knowledge come from in one of over 2,500 documented cases worldwide? And how can we explain a phenomenon found in more than a third of the cases studied? Children develop birthmarks that correspond with medical precision to the fatal wounds of people who lived decades before they were born. What is this? Body memory? This isn't a collection of mystical tales. It's an investigation. Over the next 40 minutes, we will analyze scientific protocols, medical reports, and eyewitness testimonies. We will give you 7 keys that will allow you to try to crack the code of this hidden reality yourself. The mystery of birthmarks, this physical evidence, will be explored in detail in Section 3, when we examine the most compelling evidence. A fact that defies logic, a tunnel of light, meeting deceased relatives, a feeling of universal love. Why are these images, which we consider Hollywood cliches, described with stunning accuracy by people from different parts of the world, from an atheist in New York to a tribe member in the Amazon who has never seen a movie? At first glance, the explanation seems simple. We hear these stories from childhood, and in a critical moment, the dying brain reproduces a familiar and comforting scenario. But here's what the sources reveal. When Raymond Moody published his book Life After Life in 1975, he systemized hundreds of cases. It turned out that universal elements like leaving the body, a life review, and a reluctance to return are also found in those who had never heard of such concepts, including young children. This completely shatters the theory of cultural conditioning. It's as if the same program runs every time a heart stops. That's why scientists have attempted to map this journey and even set traps along the way. How can a person whose brain is, by all instrumental readings, dead, still see and hear? If information isn't coming through the senses, what mechanism is behind it, and how can it be proven in a laboratory setting? The logic of scientists like Sam Parnia was pragmatic. If people truly leave their bodies and float near the ceiling, they should be able to see things that are not visible from the bed. As part of the International AWARE project, special markers, pictures placed on top of cabinets, visible only from above, were installed in intensive care units. It was a trap for consciousness. For years, the results were nil, strengthening the skeptic's position. And then, it happened. One patient, after being resuscitated, described in detail not only the doctor's actions, but also the sound and appearance of a specific machine that was turned on for only 2 minutes while he was clinically dead. His account was verified minute by minute. This was the first piece of laboratory-validated evidence. But the most powerful testimony comes not from instruments, but from those who never had the physical ability to see. A detail that defies common sense. The brain of a person born blind lacks a developed visual cortex. It doesn't know what light, color, or perspective is. Why then, after experiencing clinical death, do they describe the world just like a sighted person? For a scientific skeptic, the answer is obvious: hypoxia. Oxygen deprivation to the brain causes hallucinations by activating random neurons. It seems logical. It's just a theater in a dying brain. However, medical studies show that hypoxia leads to chaotic and frightening states, not the hyper-clear and structured experiences typical of near-death experiences. But the main argument that shatters this theory is the vision of the blind. No amount of hypoxia can create something in the brain that was never there: the ability to process visual information. This leaves a gaping hole in the materialistic worldview. But what if the experiences of adults are just the tip of the iceberg, and the most crucial evidence is hidden in the memories of children? We've seen the universal structure of near-death experiences and scientific evidence that is difficult to refute. But what if we've been missing the main point all along? What if that light isn't the final destination, but merely a transfer point? So far, we have 3 facts. Near-death experiences have a universal structure. There are verified cases of out-of-body perception, and standard scientific explanations fail to hold up under scrutiny. While logic suggests that adult experiences can always be questioned, false memory, cultural influence, there is a category of witnesses almost invulnerable to this criticism. These are young children, whose minds are still a blank slate. They don't yet know how to lie for personal gain, and it is they who sometimes begin to talk about not just seeing the other side, but having lived before. They ask to be taken home to another city and name people who died long before they were born. And their evidence wasn't just words, it was carved into their very bodies. When a 3-year-old child begins to call himself by another name and describe his other family in detail, most parents see it as nothing more than a child's fantasy. What made a world-renowned psychiatrist, Ian Stevenson, see the potential for a scientific breakthrough? At first, his approach was extremely skeptical. Stevenson, head of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Virginia, assumed there was a rational explanation for everything: cryptomnesia, parental deception, or vivid fantasies. Over 40 years, he and his team studied more than 2,500 such cases worldwide. They discovered that the phenomenon recurred across different cultures, most often in children between the ages of 2 and 5, who would then spontaneously forget their past life by age 7 or 8. The key rule of his protocol was ironclad. First, a complete and detailed recording of all the child's statements, and only then, an attempt to find corroboration. This prevented any possibility of tailoring the facts. But what kind of evidence were they looking for? The answer lies in details that are impossible to invent. How does a child know about a hiding place where a deceased person kept money? How can he name not only the members of his past family, but also their pets, which are not mentioned in any official records? The researchers worked like detectives, digging through archives and interviewing witnesses. The case of James Leininger became a textbook example. He didn't just remember a plane, he named the exact aircraft carrier, the Natoma Bay, the type of fighter, the Corsair, and its known technical issue with tires bursting on landing. But the most irrefutable proof was physical. In 35% of cases, children were found to have birthmarks that corresponded with medical precision to fatal wounds from a past life: a bullet entry wound on the forehead, a scar from an axe blow on the back. This was no longer just a memory of the mind, but a memory of the body. The key to understanding lay in the moment when the two families met face to face. A small child walks into a room where an elderly couple is sitting. He runs to one of the women, hugs her, and says, Mom, I'm back." At first, there is total disbelief. The past family tests the child, showing him group photos and asking tricky questions. Where an exposé was expected, shock followed. The child not only recognized people in the photos, but also called them by childhood nicknames everyone had long forgotten. He would point to a scratch on an old table and say, "Remember, I did that when I was 5. The turning point often came down to a detail known only to the deceased and one other person. The child approaches an old friend and whispers a phrase they used to say to each other before battle. At that moment, all doubt crumbles. But sometimes, children bring back more than just memories. They bring back entire languages they never learned. A fact that breaks logic: it takes years to learn a foreign language. How do we explain cases where young children, who have never left their village, suddenly start speaking fluently in an ancient dialect that no one around them understands? This phenomenon is called xenoglossy. Scientists believe it is most often cryptomnesia. The child may have heard the language on television. But in several cases meticulously documented by Stevenson, this explanation didn't work. Invited linguists confirmed that the child was using rare dialects or archaic forms of a language impossible to hear in modern media. Moreover, the child spoke it meaningfully, engaging in dialogue. Xenoglossy is no longer just about memories, it's the transfer of an entire linguistic system. We have seen how consciousness can be reborn in a new body. But what if entire civilizations aren't reborn, but are simply hidden from us? While the ancient Greeks told myths of Hades, the Norse of the underground world of Svartalfheim, and Buddhists of the mystical Shambhala, they were separated by thousands of miles. Why is the idea of a world within a world universal to all of humanity? At the center of these legends often lies Agartha, a mythical land of a highly advanced civilization that went underground after a global catastrophe. It's a beautiful metaphor, a tale of a lost paradise. But reality struck hard when, in 1692, astronomer Edmund Halley the discoverer of the comet, seriously presented a theory of a hollow Earth composed of several concentric spheres to the Royal Society of London. This idea was born not in esoteric circles, but in the cradle of modern science. Halley even suggested that the inner worlds were inhabited and illuminated by a luminous atmosphere. But there were those who moved from theory to active searching, and their motives were far more sinister. Why did the Third Reich, obsessed with technological superiority, spend vast resources sending an expedition to Tibet in 1938? Officially, the expedition led by SS biologist Ernst Schaefer was to study flora and fauna. But behind it was the ideology of the Thule Society and the Ahnenerbe, who believed the Aryan race descended from superhumans who survived in an underground kingdom. The facts contradict the scientific cover story. The expedition was funded directly by the SS budget and reported personally to Himmler. Their real mission was to find the entrance to Agartha and establish contact with the ancient Aryans to obtain the secret of real energy. The state that started the bloodiest war in history built its ideology on an esoteric myth. But the strangest events related to the Hollow Earth occurred not in Tibet, but in the ice of Antarctica. In 1947, the U.S. Navy sent an armada of 13 ships and 4,700 men to Antarctica. The official goal of Operation High Jump was scientific research. But a document known as the Secret Diary of Admiral Byrd exists. In it, he allegedly describes discovering an entrance into the Earth's interior during a flight, flying over green valleys with mammoths, and being met by flying saucers that escorted him to an underground city. The diary culminates with a meeting with the ruler of Agartha, who warns humanity about the dangers of nuclear weapons. Byrd was supposedly forced into silence under threat of a court-martial. But where is the truth, and where is the fiction? It's time to separate verifiable facts from myths. Could the Earth actually be hollow? Modern geology provides a definitive answer: no. The analysis of seismic waves from earthquakes passing through the planet allows us to see its structure. We know about the existence of a liquid outer core and a solid inner core. It's like a doctor tapping on a patient's chest. The sound reveals where the dense organs are and where the cavities lie. Proponents of the theory claim Byrd's diary is a forgery created to discredit him and that Nazi archives are classified. This is a classic move where the absence of evidence is treated as proof of a conspiracy, and here we must draw a line. Unlike the thousands of verifiable testimonies, the Hollow Earth theory has not a single verifiable fact to support it. But it is important because it shows humanity's deep-seated yearning for an other world. Now that we have all the pieces of the puzzle, it's time to put them to the ultimate test. Enough with the mystery. What if there is a stunningly simple materialistic explanation for all of this, and we just want to believe in a miracle? Let's give the floor to a scientific skeptic. His argument is strong and logical. Near-death experiences are the agony of the brain. Oxygen deprivation, or hypoxia, and a pre-death flood of neurotransmitters create vivid but meaningless hallucinations. It's not a journey of the soul, but a chemical storm inside the skull. This theory works perfectly until you encounter one fact. 80% of people born blind who have had a near-death experience report visual impressions. No amount of hypoxia can create something in the brain that was never there. It's like a computer without a video card suddenly starting to play a 4K movie. And the second blow, the AWARE project, which recorded conscious perception during a complete instrument-confirmed shutdown of the cerebral cortex. The skeptics' explanations are elegant, but they only work if you throw out the most important evidence. But perhaps their arguments will be stronger when it comes to reincarnation. All right, near-death experiences are complicated. But what about children who remember past lives? Isn't that just an obvious mix of childhood fantasies, parental vanity, and overheard conversations? The skeptic offers 3 keys to this puzzle. First, cryptomnesia, where a child accidentally hears a story and claims it as their own. Second, vivid fantasies encouraged by adults. Third, the most cynical, outright deception by parents for fame or money. But here's what the research protocols reveal. Ian Stevenson rejected 9 out of 10 cases for these very reasons. He only took on cases where the possibility of prior contact was ruled out. Most of his cases were from remote villages in India and Sri Lanka in the 1960s, where there were no televisions or newspapers. And the final nail in the coffin of this theory is the specificity of the details. James Leininger named technical features of the Corsair aircraft that his father, a military enthusiast, could only find in specialized archives. A child could not have overheard that. But what if it's all just an incredible, gigantic chain of coincidences? The number is shocking. Out of millions of children, there will always be a few whose fantasies accidentally match a real story. It's simply the law of large numbers, a statistical anomaly. This argument seems ironclad. Probability theory does indeed state that the most incredible coincidences are possible. But the numbers destroy this picture. On average, a child in the studied cases reported 30 to 40 verifiable facts. The probability of even 10 such details coinciding by chance is astronomically small. And we have over 2,500 such cases. To claim this is all a coincidence is like tossing a handful of sand and expecting all the grains to line up with millimeter precision, and then repeating that trick 2,500 times in a row. But the absolute knockout blow to the coincidence theory is the physical evidence. 35% of cases with birthmarks that precisely match fatal wounds. What is the probability that a child would randomly have a birthmark shaped like a bullet hole exactly above his left eye, just like the police officer who was shot 20 years ago whose life he remembers? The probability approaches zero. If all standard explanations fail, what are we left with? We have systematically dismantled all the main arguments of the skeptics. Does this mean the theory of life after death and reincarnation is proven? The answer is no. Even when cornered, a true scientist will say, the fact that I cannot explain phenomenon A with theory B does not prove your theory C to be true. And that is an absolutely honest position. The absence of an explanation is not proof. That is why the goal of this film is not to force a ready-made answer upon you. The goal is to show that the standard map of reality is flawed. It does not describe the entire territory. There are blank spots that official science prefers to ignore simply because they don't fit the paradigm. We have examined the evidence. We have listened to the skeptics. Now comes the most important stage. What if near-death experiences, reincarnation, and even the myth of Agartha are not three different phenomena, but three different perspectives on the same hidden, multi-dimensional reality? It's time to put this puzzle together. Let's connect these scattered dots on the map. On one hand, we have thousands of testimonies of a post-mortem journey, universal across all cultures. This describes a transitional phase. On the other hand, we have thousands of Ian Stevenson's protocols describing a destination and a subsequent return. This is data about the cycle itself. If you combine these two data sets, the separate anomalies form a single chain, a kind of root for consciousness. A near-death experience is the bright flame of a dying fire. The memories of children are the smoldering embers from which a new flame can ignite. This transforms a collection of mysteries into a unified model that demands consideration, not dismissal. But if this is a single process, then what exactly is it that travels? How does a brain, deprived of oxygen and in a state of clinical death, generate hyperclear, structured, and verifiable experiences? How does it show a movie to someone who has never seen light? Over 80% of patients born blind in Dr. Kenneth Ring's studies described visual details of their resuscitation, a fact that shatters all of modern neurobiology. This points to the hypothesis that the brain does not create consciousness. It receives and processes it, like a radio receiver. A broken receiver doesn't destroy the music, it just stops broadcasting it at that location. And the most physical proof of this model is birthmarks. In 35% of cases, they precisely match the fatal wounds of past personalities. This means that consciousness is capable of carrying information that later manifests on the physical body. What does this new map of reality mean for each of us personally? Behind all these facts and studies lies the ultimate human fear, the fear of non-existence, of complete and final annihilation. The evidence presented challenges this idea, offering an alternative, the continuation of the journey. This is not a call to faith. It is an invitation to consider the consequences if this data is correct. How does it change our attitude towards loss, towards the meaning of our actions? It questions three fundamental fears: the fear of death, the fear of losing loved ones, and the fear of a meaningless existence. The purpose of this film is not to give you a ready-made answer, but to provide systematized data that science often ignores. It is an invitation to think for yourself, based on facts, not dogma. And now, with all the evidence on the table, you face the ultimate choice. Everything you have seen, what is it? On one hand, you can consider these thousands of testimonies, from the seeing blind to 2-year-old James Leininger screaming in his sleep about a burning plane, as mere noise. A collection of as-yet unexplained anomalies, glitches in a dying brain, and memory errors. This is a safe position that doesn't require a revision of your worldview. On the other hand, you can see a clear signal in these thousands of verifiable and cross-cultural accounts. A signal that reality is more complex than we assume, and that the human personality is more than just a product of biochemistry. This position requires the courage to reconsider your beliefs. So is it signal or noise? Write just one word in the comments. The choice is yours.